welcome to crafting engaging surveys that people actually want to take here today. And to start, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to introduce ourselves, and then we will hop right into this content. If you have any questions throughout this workshop, please drop them in the chat. I have this up and I can see comments and questions and stuff like that. So if you have anything, I would love to see and chat about it. So these surveys are one of my favorite things. So without further ado, I will let Laura say hello.
Hi, everyone. I am Laura Moody, one of the founding partners of Purpose Possible. We are a consulting agency with offices in Atlanta and DC, and we focus on supporting nonprofits and funders in basically making their purpose possible, all the things that distract leadership from doing the work at hand. So we provide fundraising, communications, organizational strategy, program design and management services for those audiences.
And I am Sarah Lawrence. I am a freelance graphic designer, also here in Atlanta, a frequent collaborator with Purpose Possible. I also I guess like I mentioned a second ago, I'm just a huge survey nerd. I love asking people questions. I love getting feedback from people. I'm always doing the little like polls in Instagram, just because every time something comes up, I'm like thinking about ice cream, and I'm like, I wonder what everybody's favorite ice cream is. I just like want to know and I want to ask questions. I also read a lot about survey design and have a certificate from the University of Michigan's social survey program. So I've really gone all in on the art and science of asking people questions about things. So to kick this off, I want to go ahead and have us fill out a survey, because that's why we're here. This is a QR code that you should be able to scan and pull up, and I have also dropped the link in the chat. So I will give you a little second to scan the QR code if you'd like to do that, and then while you're filling out this very fun survey that I put together for y'all today, I will tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover in this next hour or so. So first, we are going to talk about, why do we need surveys? What do we use them for? We're going to talk about, what can we learn from surveys? What are their kind of like advantages, disadvantages, just like what can we learn? Why are they useful? What do we need? We will cover some things that might hurt the completion rate of surveys, things like survey fatigue and suspicion about the different aspects of what you're being asked, and then how to rebuild that trust with your audience, so that when you give them a survey, ask them for feedback, want to get in touch with them in the future, like they trust you and they trust this information that you're asking for. And then to round it all out, we're going to talk about making it a little bit fun, because asking people for feedback and giving people surveys shouldn't be boring and dry and make it difficult. That's another part of getting that trust and getting that completion rate, if that's something that you're tracking. Make it a little bit fun. Stacia says that made me laugh, the survey, because I hope it did. I had a lot of fun making that one for y'all. All right.
So first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about, why do we even need surveys? They can be used for a lot of different things. I'm sure all of you have used surveys a lot in the past, or even if you're new to them, here are some of the reasons why you might actually need to use a survey. So first and foremost, as a screener, to quickly qualify or disqualify respondents based on their answers. That prevents you getting a lot of information that you don't actually really need, or from an audience that you don't really need to poll, so you don't, again, lead to that survey fatigue. It lets you decide who takes your survey based on the target audience you actually want to hear from. Or to get a quick, objective, third-party response or opinion on any given topic. or to set a baseline and compare results over time. For a lot of nonprofits, this is really, really key. One example might be constituent or employee satisfaction. And finally, to learn more about the audiences that you serve. Again, really important for nonprofits. A survey is an excellent tool to learn about the makeup of your constituents and more about their needs and desires.
So if you have heard this quote before, please add your favorite emojis to the chat because I'm curious to see something. Here I am giving feedback already. So I sort of love this quote because there's no actual proof that Henry Ford said this. It gets attributed to him all the time. I think it also gets attributed to Steve Jobs with the iPhone. But the kernel of truth is there. Like it's still a good thing to keep in mind when considering your survey design and what you're asking people. Thank you, Shayna, for the alien emoji. Love that. Okay, I always love seeing people's favorite emojis. This makes me very happy. So it can be difficult to ask people exactly what they want because they may not know. They may not know how to describe what they want. They may not know an option is even possible. This quote, like if you think about this quote in context, he's asking people who have never seen a car, they're going, wouldn't it be cool if I had this like mechanized thing that like took me places without the need of an animal? Like people hadn't seen a car yet, so they wouldn't even know to ask for that. We need to ask questions with these types of constraints in mind and instead ask questions that get to the root of a person's need. A lot of times people don't know exactly what they want until you show it to them. I see this in a lot in the work I do as a graphic designer. Another way I think about kind of how this works in reality is like if you go to a salon or a barbershop and you're like trying to describe a hairstyle to the person doing your hair, but you like don't have the right words and you're kind of bumbling it. Like I know that's what it's like when I go to the salon, but you may lack the words that you need to describe the specific thing that you're looking for, which is why they often encourage you to bring in a picture because you can, there's a way to sort of explain that in a way that maybe you didn't have the right words for. So, you don't always want to just lay it out for people and ask them would like a specific sort of thing. You want to leave it more open-ended and more targeted to what they need. So I guess I was going to say, when is the last time you were asked to take a survey? But I guess technically a minute ago. But before that, was it in the past week? Was it in the past month? How many times a month do you get asked to give feedback on something? And are you tired of giving feedback? Are you tired of constantly getting these like, little thing like promoted tweets and promoted Instagram posts saying like, we want your feedback? I know Christy Teigen is tired of this. Just being hit with this feedback and survey request all the time. Sometimes you get surveys dropped in your GPS app while you're driving. You're going, have you seen this brand on Waze lately? And I'm like, I'm on the interstate, so I would be great if you were to ask me this later. I'm seeing stores asking you to review items, tell them about your last visit, every single time you leave a service, every time you order food or get something at a store. Totally agree. Like we are being asked for feedback all the time. And so that is a problem. I mean, over serving is a thing that makes you kind of like shy away from doing that. Like even if somebody wrote the most compelling survey of all time, like because you're so bombarded with that request all the time, it makes you kind of not want to participate. And this is sort of a thing that we kind of solve all together as a group of professionals because it's kind of like when you were in school and like all your teachers assigned homework on the same night and you're just like, don't you guys talk to each other? Over surveying is sort of like that. You can use surveys sparingly and really consider if one is necessary. Consider other ways that you can collect information, maybe by creatively using analytics or focus groups, instead of just like firing off 100 Google forms a minute, like think about like, how do I talk to the people that I actually want to talk to? There's also something called question fatigue. Question fatigue is when you ask the same question in multiple ways. Question fatigue is when someone repeats a question and it means the same thing. Question fatigue is when you want to know the same thing in a variety of formats. Doesn't that feel kind of annoying? Doing this feels like you're trying to fill space, trying to pad a survey, and it also really just feels like you're wasting someone's time. This can lead to a high dropout rate because you're like, well, I already answered that question 2 pages ago. Like, why are you asking me this again? Spend the time really thinking about each question you're asking and what purpose it serves. And then there's also disingenuous surveying, which sort of feels like the ultimate time waster. If I were to give you a survey or send you a form that says like, how cute is this koala? That's sort of a biased question. You're not asking me what I think about the koala. You are clearly expecting me to answer that the koala is cute. And to be fair, it is. But seeing this in practice can feel annoying. It just feels like when you restrict alternatives, when you restrict the way for people to respond, they feel like their voice doesn't matter, and they feel, what if I don't think the koala is cute? There's nowhere for me to answer as part of this survey. People tend to disengage and they tend to drop out. Oh, Laura, hang on.
So now we're going to
Go for
talk
it.
a little bit about survey suspicion and some of the reasons why you may not get a response at all, or people may hesitate or skip over certain questions within your survey. So first and foremost, you want to be really honest and upfront about who you are. Remind people who your organization is and what you actually do for them and your community. And then two, why are you asking these questions? Just setting up the expectation of why you need to do a survey, why you're coming to them, why it's important that they provide this information, and how it can either improve their experience or enhance their community. That's especially true for demographic or information that feels somewhat personal or private. You want to be very clear about why your organization needs this information. For nonprofits, many of you rely on foundations or government grants to provide the services for your audience. And it's really okay to tell people in your actual survey document that you're required to provide data about where this funding is going, how it's being used, and who is benefiting from your services. That's where your audience comes in, and why their demographic information is a really vital tool to ensure that your organization can continue to provide those services to their community for years to come. Just be really frank and honest about that. And finally, think about if you're designing a new program or evaluating an existing program, explaining that too. You're asking these questions to determine if a program is valuable to the audience that you're hoping to serve. And then finally, what happens to this data? You want to be really clear that this information will be aggregated and will be anonymous and not tied to that individual in any way. The information will be compiled and the insights will be gathered and shared internally only with your employees or with funders as required. And just be really honest and clear about that in a written way in your surveying tool.
So from here, with all that in mind, because that feels like maybe a lot to take in, because you're like, I have so many questions. I want to ask all these different people, all these different questions at all this time. We're not saying not to do that. We're just saying do that in a way that builds trust with your audience and with your community. So, and the key ways to do that is to consider these elements of fatigue and suspicion and actively weave those lessons into your survey. For example, we have this facility in Atlanta called the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, otherwise known as CHARM. And it is what it sounds like. Yeah, you take your broken TVs, your styrofoam, your spray paint cans, all your hard to recycle materials, and they will dispose of them in the appropriate way for each item. So it sounds like a dump, right? You take stuff to the dump and they deal with it. You drive up, you drop off. However, when you go to Charm, they ask you to register ahead of time and schedule time to drop off. As part of this, they ask for personal information, like your zip code. So why would a dump need my zip code? It seems pretty anonymous to me. So they clarify this up front. It's expensive to properly dispose of waste. Charm is almost nearly free, and they rely heavily on grants and sponsorships that allow them to do this work. They use the zip code data collected during the registration process to demonstrate their efficacy in the community and the communities that they serve. They are clear on the very, on this very top of this page, they're clear about what they're doing with this information and how you're helping them by providing it. And then once you have this, like, because Charm is a very cool place. I have been there many times. Everyone is extremely nice. It feels good to be taking my hard to recycle thingies to a place where they're being dealt with in the appropriate way. And so I have a lot of goodwill towards this organization. And so then when they tell me, like, I want this information and here's what we're doing with it and here's how we grow this organization, I'm like stoked to give that information. I'm like, I'll tell you more. You ask me whatever you want, I'll tell you. If it helps you out, like, I'll give you that information. So you can also respect people's time. I recently received, kind of the opposite of this, like, very quick little Charm sign up. I recently received a form from a transit nonprofit, like transit planning and transportation funding in the regional area of the city, which is interesting to me and not many other people. And I wanted to take it to help support their mission, to help, help just provide that community feedback for transportation planning in the metro area. After entering all of my information in, name, email address, all the specific stuff, answering several pages of questions with super technical, detailed questions about transit funding and transportation allocations in the state budget to do the things, I was like already feeling a little exhausted, and then looked down to realize I was only 45% of the way through this survey. And I was like, you guys have got to be kidding me. And I felt drained, and this is like a topic that I'm interested in. So I was frustrated about how far I had to go, and I ultimately closed the survey. This should have been, it could have been handled differently. It could have been something where they used a screener to quickly kind of gather that information and then set up maybe interviews, or primed it with saying, like, this form may take you 15 minutes. Just giving you some sort of notice up front that it's either going to take a long time, or figuring out a way to kind of break that into smaller chunks. Because all of this, at the end of the day for this, if you show people a survey that demonstrates that you have put time and thought into it, they will give you theirs. If they had told me up front that it was going to be technical, but they would provide context and that it would take a long time and that I should maybe set aside 15 minutes to do it, I would have been game. But I was like in line somewhere and was like, oh, gosh. If you're sending out mass unsolicited survey requests, make them short. Give people an option to say they would like to give more detailed feedback at a later date, and then send them the complicated form. I think there's a DreamHost is like a web hosting platform that you like host websites on, and their contact support form is very interesting in that it asks your standard stuff like what's your account, email, and all the issue that you're having. But they also have this question at the bottom of their form saying, what is your comfort level with web hosting and web domain processes? You can say, like, I'm a newbie, explain everything to me very carefully, or like, I'm an expert, talk to me like I'm an expert. And I love that they do that, because that gives you a little bit, it gives them more information on how to communicate with you on things that are complicated, and makes me feel like I am not walking into a situation where I'm not prepared at all to be told a lot of technical stuff. Tell them how long it will take, give them ability to respond later, and just respect their time. So there's also a concept called cognitive load, and in a nutshell, this is the amount of processing your brain has to do at one time. So think about, reading a book while listening to a podcast while someone is talking to you. Maybe you can sort of follow all those threads at the same time, but you're not really able to consider all three sources of information in one go. You'll feel overwhelmed at the very least. So this is sort of kind of cognitive load. It's how much your brain is being asked to balance at one time. And there are two ways to consider cognitive load in a survey. So like we mentioned a second ago, consider the complexity of your question. If you're asking something that is at the very limit of a layman's expertise, keep it short. Or provide like definitions and context near the question. So it's like we're asking about this curb cuts, or I don't know, something like more complicated than that. Say what that is, and then ask me a question about it. And then consider the actual cognitive load in the answering of the questions. Using these complex matrices like this one feels like it's saving time by asking fewer questions. It's like it's really just a one question survey. It's really not. It's really 5 questions that I have to like figure out this little like connect 4 diagram. It's asking people to consider a lot of variables at one time, and they can feel overwhelmed. In general, I usually advise to kind of avoid these matrix questions. They require time and concentration. They are really not mobile friendly. They look really wacky and crunched on mobile, and they look like a lot of work. They look like just something you look at this and you're like, I don't want to deal with this right now, and then people may drop out of your survey. So if I would recommend typically to avoid them, but there can be specific circumstances when it might make sense to use one. But I would recommend making it optional if you can. And someone can just be like, I'm just going to keep going. This seems like a lot.
So you want to make sure that folks understand that the survey is coming from a verified source. Again, people are wary of giving their personal information on any sort of online platform. So make sure to embed your survey on your organization's website, or to share via official channels like social media channels, so people know it's actually associated with you, unlike this very suspicious one from the city of
Atlanta. Yeah, this one's funny. It's going around the Atlanta community, and it's like designed to look like it's from the city, but the city hasn't shared it, and so it does not. Once you read through it, you're like, this is not from the city.
Yeah. And then of course, we always want to think about inclusivity. Providing inclusive choices in your questions. If you must ask about something like gender identity, sex, race, ethnicity, other demographics, do the work of providing inclusive answer choices. If you're worried you're leaving out a group of people in your question, your safest bet is always to leave an open answer option. You can also give them the opportunity to decline self-identify, or to skip the question entirely.
And following inclusivity, there's also accessibility, and there are a lot of things to keep in mind when considering accessibility in surveys. And the most important things I want to, this could be accessibility on the internet in general is and should be like a whole separate thing, but there are maybe 3 takeaways that if you leave today with only these 3 takeaways on accessibility and survey design, that will be good. Make sure all text is written out and not hidden inside images that screen readers cannot parse. So if you're like doing an email design or something on your website, and then just like you've written the text out in like Canva or Illustrator, and then you've saved it as an image and then posted it online, screen readers cannot read that. They see it as just an image block, and so that is not parsable by screen readers or translators or any sort of accessible like services that you might use. If you are using images as images, using like comparing between like 2 photographs of something, kind of like back to the salon thing, like, do you want this haircut or this haircut? Make sure you're adding alt text to describe the image for the user. And there's a little bit of an art to that too. I think the limit is maybe like 200 characters or so. So you can't do like 1,000 words to describe an image, even though poetically you might want to. So you want to kind of keep it short, keep it specific, and describe the image. And then if you are asking a series of questions, include your context at the beginning of each question so that the user doesn't have to jump around. If you think about reading, like using a screen reader or a translator or any sort of accessible service, it's going to read it just kind of straight down. It's not going to jump around like you might if you were reading with your eyes. So if you're saying like what the different numbers mean, kind of on this example, there are two on the left side, there are two questions like quality of lunch menu and quality of the evening meal. At the very top, they have given kind of a key for what these numbers are supposed to represent. And then they have asked you to remember this key and then answer all these questions. If this was a more complicated question, like series, that could also be a cognitive load issue, but also someone, maybe on like question 10, and they forgot what the scale is supposed to be, and they can't really easily jump back up to access it. So it's sort of a complicated way of saying, like, on this right side, the screenshot includes, instead of numbers, it includes words like excellent, good, average, poor, or dreadful for each question.
So thinking again about how to reduce over surveying, again, causing that surveying fatigue, the poor koala bear. You want to avoid continuously sending the same group of people a different survey every week. Start by setting up good practices to segment your groups and be more specific. For example, if you have a citywide email list with 10,000 people, but you just really need to ask questions about one specific corridor or one neighborhood, spend the time up front to segment your data so that you can reach out to just the group of, 400 people exactly. This might be an initial demographic survey where you can clearly state why you're doing this to reach you more effectively, and then incorporating all the new folks to this list with a questionnaire. I know in MailChimp and other, email marketing tools, you can do some pretty specific segmentation, and also an auto-generated welcome email when they sign up for your newsletter, asking people to update this information that then you can use to segment your data going forward. In addition to geographic sort of boundaries, this could also apply to age groups or to specific categories within your audience that you're trying to reach, like parents or veterans or Gen Z members. You wouldn't necessarily want to ask all of those groups the same questions if you're really trying to get specific feedback from one of those specific groups.
Yeah. And yeah, so you might be sending out surveys every single day, but that doesn't mean everyone is receiving a survey every day. They're receiving them at the appropriate time in the appropriate context. And then, okay, so once you've done all this legwork and all this planning and you've written the most beautiful, perfect survey, what if we made it fun or at least caught people's attention in a different kind of way? So I am in Atlanta, if I haven't mentioned that. And every Sunday, I think maybe 2019 or so, we used to visit our in-laws for dinner across town. We took the same route, and I don't know why I never took a different route, but when we took the same route, and then when we came to this intersection, we would sit there and complain about how long it took for this light to change. It feels like I feel like everyone has that like nemesis street light where they're just like, why am I here? This is taking forever. And then one day we got to the intersection just as the light turned red, and I was like, nah, I'm gonna be here for 3 hours now while I wait for this light to change. I shook my fists, and then I realized there was this little sign sitting next to the traffic light pole. It was a DIY yard sign that said, "Are you tired of waiting for this light to change?" with a little short link that I could read from where I was sitting, and also a QR code that I could easily scan from the passenger seat. This QR code then opened up a quick little Google form to let me give comment on how I felt about the traffic light's timing, and then also told me that the information was being collected by the local neighborhood association. I thought this was fantastic. I was really excited because here I am, a captive audience with nothing else better to do currently, in the right frame of mind, with plenty of time to fill a quick survey. I pressed submit and the light changed, and then we were on our way. And I've seen this work in other situations too. For example, this Better by Bike project from a few years ago placed yard signs along bike lanes to gather feedback from community members. They made it easy. You could simply text a phrase to a phone number, no smartphone or desktop required, which is, where you are likely to want to engage with it. Maybe you're just like, you pull over for a second, text a little number, get an immediate like series of questions that you just like text, and then you're just on the go. That works on any type of phone, usually with poor service if you're like out somewhere on a bike ride. So it's very good at kind of meeting people where they're at. We can also do work to create content that engages our audience and asks questions that fit the type of feedback that we want. And I'll give you a second to read this question. If you read this question, are you exactly sure what they're asking? Their question is, please rate the number of clicks to get where you want on this site, from 1, which is poor, to 10, which is excellent. I'm just like, think about that for a second. It's confusing. I'm not exactly sure. Like, I've obviously like wanted to, take this survey, but I have no idea what this question means. And you can also, when we think about rate the number, yeah, Nathan says rate the number of clicks. What does that mean? I don't know. I wish I did. So you can also give incentives that encourage people to give feedback, because it takes time to fill out a survey, whether that's a couple of minutes or 15 minutes or, I don't know, some sort of longer situation. And that is time not spent doing something else. Someone took a beat, they wanted to help, they filled out your survey. We should make sure that they know that we're grateful. They took a minute to do something for us. And some kind of help, thank you can help kind of make that known. This is also tricky, but easy to tweak if you need to. For example, a restaurant, let's say you like had a bad experience at a restaurant and then they reached out they say, like I think someone said earlier, like I always get like feedback requests when I leave a restaurant. Let's say you had a bad experience. You might not want their incentive of 1% off next time you visit, because if you've had a bad experience, you're not coming back. So, we want to make sure that the incentive makes sense for the situation and that people are interested without being like too interested, and then like only doing it for the incentive. There is also gamification. Let's say another emoji. Please add the ghost emoji in the chat if you have heard this term, especially when used for survey design. Seeing some quick ghost emojis. Okay, cool. Good. It's a spooky little chat right now. I love it. So so yeah, we hear this word all the time when talking about gamification. And it's funny because when you try to, look into what does that mean, because gamification is just such a big thing. It's been a big thing for like almost a decade now. Typically what you see is let people create avatars, use leaderboards, offer or engage with cryptocurrency. And none of these things to me make a lot of sense with any of the previous examples. Like I'm at the stoplight trying to fill out the survey about the red light that I hate, and it's like, would you like to create an avatar before you fill out the survey? And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So I don't like, this is an interesting suggestion, and I would love to hear in the chat if you guys have like thoughts on how this has been done before. But we have a couple that we will also share. And often this doesn't consider best practices like time management and cognitive load and all those different things. So here is kind of how we are trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, so now I get to give a fun anecdote. So back in 2020, my company, Purpose Possible, along with Central Atlanta Progress, which is a community improvement district here in Atlanta, some folks know them as BIDs instead of CIDs, we embarked on a project to commission and install a piece of public art in a park in downtown Atlanta. It was about the relationship between Mayors Ivan Allen and Maynard Jackson, two very storied people in sort of Atlanta's legacy. And we intentionally had planned to do a ton of community activities and programming and town halls and film screenings and all this amazing sort of community engagement in order to get a lot of really personal and direct feedback on this potential piece of public art that would use some public funding. However, you notice I said that was 2020. So of course, COVID shut down all of our amazing plans. So we had to pivot instead to developing a completely sort of bespoke platform that turned our survey questions and our data gathering and preference gathering into a game of sorts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we were like kicking off this project like January 20th, 2020 or something, just being like, we have this full year of things planned out. We're super excited.
Yeah.
So to do this platform or to do this survey, because a lot of what we wanted to do was very like interactive community feedback gathering, like tying strings to things, using post-it notes, like using some sort of like tactile, fun way for people to engage with this feedback that we were hoping to get. So, you know, the previous slide was like the cover of the game, and then because there would be nobody there to give the context, we did have them listen to kind of a 1-minute clip or so of just saying like, you know, here is about the project, here is what we are hoping to do with this information and hoping to learn from you so that we can use this to inform the art that will exist in this park, presumably forever. And then once the video had finished playing, there was a little like button to make it go next. And then, so instead of, you know, complex matrices and bullet point lists and radio buttons and checkboxes and stuff, you know, we asked respondents to literally drag and slide elements from one side of the spectrum to another. You know, it had this like very satisfying kind of like when you're like doing a little like playing a little phone game, has like a really satisfying sort of feeling that you're playing a little game. You know, we wanted to know more about how people currently use the space. And you know, that is one of those things that can be difficult to describe, you know. So instead of long descriptions, we used a handful of carefully chosen images that represented different sort of vibes for the space. And if you can see in this screenshot, basically like the top two photos are in a nutshell, they're kind of like music during the day and then like concerts in the park at night. And then the bottom would be like yoga, so kind of implying, you know, programming and activities during the day. And then the bottom right photo is somebody on their laptop working. So like, do we want more of an activity programming driven space, or do we want a space that, you know, encourages people to get outside and work there? So then respondents could slide each image so that they took up as much space on the screen that they felt, you know, was accurate to them and what they wanted to see. And then for this one, lastly, we asked them to balance a series of columns, you know, the kind of strength of a column, demonstrating these themes that should be present in the intended artwork. You know, did we want themes of honor and trust to show through this art more than community or legacy? You know, how much do we want diversity to be part of this artwork? And so we let people sort of almost like build this little like column situation based on the terms that made sense to them. And the cool part, oh, sorry, this is you.
So while this was really interesting, and for the user, it felt like a game with a little bit of a twist. In the back end of this program, we were gathering actual data. Each point the respondents engaged with corresponded to actual numbers on the back end that we analyzed and provided to the actual artistic teams that were submitting their proposals to win this commission from the city.
And so this was a totally new thing that we tried out, just in the name of pivoting and that year and past. And this project was really successful. We quickly expanded the concept and completed another survey to help reimagine this outdated and mostly abandoned mall outside of Atlanta. If you have seen season 3 of Stranger Things, please add a sun emoji in the chat, because the mall where they do that big battle at the end, where like the it's been a long time since I've seen it, but like the Demogorgon, they're like fighting in the mall. This mall is a real mall in Atlanta, and you know, they're trying to figure out what should be done with that huge property. So we also used this way to gather community feedback about that. So from here, you know, I realized that this was a thing that would actually work. I saw a question in the chat about what platform did we use to create these surveys. This is a totally custom platform that would allow us to create surveys for any use for any client. It is called TallyMade, and it's very, very new. We came out of private beta last month or 2 months ago. But you know, all of this survey advice and all of these tips work if you are using any tool under the sun, from Google Forms to Typeform to SurveyMonkey, or just any paper forms, you know, any sort of thing. But if if you're interested in trying something that your audience hasn't seen before, we can share a link to TallyMade in the chat for more information. And so with that in mind, we are going to take one more survey today, this afternoon / morning. I'm dropping that link in the chat as well, and this QR code will also be up. And so you'll have a chance to sort of see what this different style of survey could have looked like. And with that, that concludes survey design. I want to go through the chat. I saw some questions come in, so I want to make sure we answer those. And if you have more questions, please let us know. We would love to answer them and chat with y'all. A question from Melissa: what are your favorite platforms for surveys? I honestly, when it's something that I'm not using with TallyMade, I honestly like to use Google Forms, because it's pretty detailed and free. Typeform has a lot of limitations, that in that like freemium model, and I think SurveyMonkey does as well. So typically I like to use Google Forms, because I often can get those questions answered that way. Also, Jotform is accessible for people with screen readers. Thank you, Rachel.
So I think some folks were curious about some of the early examples that we showed from 2020, and then for Gwinnett. So just to be clear, those early examples were built by hand and custom code that Sarah was doing on the back end. And that's what actually prompted the creation of TallyMade, because we knew that not every organization was going to have the resources or frankly the time to put into building out something really custom. We were afforded that time because of COVID, because we had a year of programming to fill. And then for Gwinnett, we had a long lead time to sort of build in that time. I will mention for Gwinnett as well, it's the most diverse county on the East Coast, and we did all of those amazing tools in 4 different languages. So again, the experience of building those customized, expensive, time exhaustive tools really prompted the creation of TallyMade. And I don't know, Sarah, if you want to tell a little bit more about the functionality of how that works for individual organizations.
Yeah, and I also see a question in the chat of kind of how the back end of TallyMade works and how the data collection is. So that is something, because it doesn't often, dragging of an image may seem like something that's like pretty qualitative, something that's like difficult to count. So each one has been considered on like how we would quantify that, how we would show that, show these respondents. And so the backend kind of generates that report for you automatically. So, we can provide reporting to clients as they're interested, whether that's daily or weekly, et cetera. I do see a question from Elise. We're trying to get comprehensive demographic information from a large group of members at our 50-year-old organization. Any tips for engaging people already in our system into taking a demographic survey? That is a good question. I have a lot of follow-up questions. If they are already in the system, I'm guessing there's some sort of CRM where they can receive emails. Typically that can just be like starting. It depends on how much like flexibility you have in your CRM and how you're sending emails, but you may send an initial like run of saying like, here's what we're doing, here's why we want to update this information in our system. Again, telling them kind of why you're asking now, what you plan to do with that information, and then encouraging them like, this will be really short, this won't be very long. It's a quick, easy thing. So, you'll get an initial response, and then depending on your capabilities with the CRM, you can send another email of all the people who didn't open the email, all who didn't click, and try and kind of whittle it down that way. So, because of the over surveying issue, a lot of people are kind of like, I think like allergic to that at this point, but there, are still ways to try and encourage them in the body of an email or in the body of an ask, to encourage that feedback.
Yeah, and there's a similar question down below from Jenny. Any tips on what to do after you send a survey twice and still aren't getting enough feedback? And it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about who is the person or the entity that is reaching out to your audience. Is the person that that your constituents know the best your executive director, or are they really not interacting with your audience on a regular basis? Are your program directors the people that your audience actually knows the best? Or is there a person who's super, super active on your social media platforms that get a lot of engagement? Consider having the emails or the directions come out from those individuals rather than the person who's the actual, leader of the organization that they may only see, as the figurehead on your website or in your newsletter, but they actually don't interact with on a regular basis. Sometimes it's a little bit about like taking the ego out of who this important survey should come from and really thinking about who are the people that my audience actually know and work with on a more regular basis.
And then also, I mean, if it's an old organization with an old list, the response rate could be low because a lot of people, the email addresses are inactive. It could be like a work email and they've left, or they're not checking it anymore. So maybe doing like a cleanup of the list might be helpful, just to see like who is still opening these emails and engaging with this information, and who could be archived.
That's a really good point of keeping your email list up to date, because that is, a ton of outdated email addresses are lowering your open rate just of your regular ongoing communications and your engagement rate on your social media. So getting rid of those dead accounts or expired accounts will increase your open and engagement rate anyway.
Baruch also had a question about how do you arrive at the right set of questions to ask. That is a good question. Typically, and Laura, I would love to hear your answer on this as well. But typically, we start with just throwing out everything we want to know or why we want to know it. Are we trying to gather information for fundraising? For some sort of event coming up, if we want to mail something to people and we want to know their address, figuring out all the things we want to know and maybe prioritizing that by like what would be nice to know and what is the most important thing we need to get from this survey, and writing questions from there and having them kind of in having them sort of like a prioritized order so that people can answer accurately.
Yeah, I would say, very clearly having your goal in mind before you start designing your questions or creating your survey. I have found surveying tends to feel like a group activity. Everyone wants to be like, oh, well, if you're asking them, if you're reaching out to people, if you're already sending that email, can you ask about so and so too? And that can get really murky. It can distract people from the core reason that you are asking, that you're going to your audience and getting their feedback. So I would say to be really diligent about sticking to what are the goals of sending this survey to this particular audience at this time. Maybe your other program person, your colleague's question, maybe it can go out at a later date or to a different audience or through a question included in your newsletter that's going out anyway, so that you're not bombarding people with questions that aren't super relevant to this really core need that you have to solve. Any advice for reaching seniors? So for that project that you that we talked about, the public art project in downtown Atlanta, we actually did do a paper survey to very targeted addresses. There happened to be a number of senior centers within sort of the geographic boundaries of the organization that was sponsoring the project. So we did a very targeted mailing to those centers. We also did directed outreach to the program directors at those centers so they would know that their residents were going to be receiving these mailers and could help them in providing their responses. I think if you can meet people where they are, so if you are doing programming for seniors, again, leaning on those program staff that are interacting with and working with seniors on a regular basis and having them conduct a survey, even if it's anecdotally in a room of 30 people in a class or something like that, having everyone raise their hand and answer a question and jotting down that data. I mean, that's a really analog sort of way of doing things, but it's also really personal. And again, you're getting direct feedback because they know the person that's reaching out to them.
Is that the one that we use the mail house for?
Yeah.
For that. Yeah, that's also an option. If you are able to contact a printer and a mail house, they often, I think they can buy that information, the demographic information from the Postal Service, or they have it because they have it somehow, and I'm assuming normal reasons. But they can also segment paper mailings by the different things that you have classified.
Right. Yeah. If you're trying to reach a really broad audience that maybe is not like within your specific, your mailing list. Like, let's say you need to do a statewide survey of seniors for some reason, a mail house can absolutely work with you. And then there are also tools that you can use internally, and breaking down data from the census. Census records are open and to the public.
Okay, cool. I was like, I just assume they have that for legal, normal good reasons that aren't.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank you,
everyone
Gina.
for coming. We really appreciate it.